We're going to look at it. So foul there on Indiana, on hole there. But then that is a technical.
That is a technical. Dead ball, contact technical.
It's a little surprising to see so many of these happen in one game because...
Oh, and I don't like the way Lexie Hull...
This wasn't just a game. It was a reckoning. Lexie Hull and Kayla McBride had history. The last time they met, it ended with a busted lip, a controversial call, and Indiana Fever fans foaming at the mouth over the injustice. Fast forward. Same players, new stakes. And this time, Hull wasn't taking the high road. She delivered a savage crossover so cold it lit up the arena and left her rival flat on the floor. Fans lost it. The clip, viral in minutes. But here's the real twist. This wasn't just personal revenge, it was symbolic. Because the Indiana Fever, they weren't supposed to survive without Caitlinclark. Half the roster gone, everyone counting them out. And yet here they were, turning rage into fuel, turning heartbreak into highlight reels. And this game, their battle cry.
Lynx 72. Indiana ends the regular season with an exclamation point. Fever have won 3 in a row as they enter the playoff.
So now the question is, was Lexie Hull's moment just a flex or the spark of a franchise reborn? Before the scoreboard tilted, before the crowd decided whose night it was, this story started with a bruise that wouldn't fade. In their previous meeting, Kayla McBride swung through space and caught Lexie Hull square in the face. Blood, confusion, and then the twist that sent Indiana's fan base into disbelief. The whistle punished Hull. Not the elbow, not the contact. Hull. The call felt backward, like the game had slipped into a funhouse mirror where consequences bent the wrong way.
I know a lot of people will talk about Napheesa not playing, but I think they're really good without her. You know, they're just a really great basketball team. So I think it was a big win for us because they set the bar high standard wise. We know what to expect when it comes to MinnesotaLynx, and so I think going into the playoffs, it was big for us because being able to know guarding Courtney Williams, knowing that her thing is a pull-up, knowing that now instead of not knowing that, it's big for us because we give ourselves a chance. And if they are the standard, we get to see where we are.
Clips bounced around timelines, slow-mo replays dissected every frame, and the consensus hardened. Indiana didn't just take a hit, they took an insult. That's the kind of moment that lingers. It changes how you lace your shoes the next time. It changes how a crowd watches, waiting for the balance to even out. For Hull, it wasn't about starting a feud. It was about refusing to let one bad call define her. She didn't beg for sympathy. She didn't campaign for payback. She kept stacking minutes, cutting hard, chasing shooters, absorbing contact, and trusting that the game eventually tells the truth. So when the schedule circled back to Minnesota, the air felt different.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been impressed with these guys since even the offseason, really, the ones that I was able to work out with in the offseason, is how hard they work. There's a work ethic and there's a work style. And to approach everything in the same way, to be so energetic, enthusiastic, and dedicated every day. And I felt that way in training camp, too. There weren't any days where I had to bring that out of them. So I think it's the nature of the women that we brought into this organization to continue to just bust their butts and play hard.
This wasn't just a rematch. It was unfinished business dressed up as a regular season finale. Indiana walked in shorthanded but sharper, like a group that had filed the previous slight away and decided to let their play do the arguing. Fans remembered the elbow. Players remembered the elbow. Hull certainly remembered the elbow. But the mission wasn't retribution. It was proof. Proof that you can turn a bad break into a backbone. The subtext hung over every possession. Would Hull shrink from the matchup? Would the memory pull her out of rhythm? Or would she step into the same space that hurt her before and reclaim it? You could feel the answer forming in the way she moved, shoulders square, feet clean, eyes up. Every catch was decisive. Every closeout was mean. She wasn't hunting a moment, she was building one. That's the real seed of what came later. The viral clip didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of this history, this stubborn refusal to let a wrong call define a player or a team. The last game gave Indiana a scar. This one gave them a stage. But that wasn't the only story driving the night, Because while a grudge can light the fuse, it takes something bigger to keep a season from blowing apart. And Indiana had already survived a storm that would have buried most teams. Every season has its breaking point, and for Indiana, it came not with one injury, but with an avalanche that buried half the roster. The names piled up until the injury report looked more like a full starting lineup than a list of scratches. Caitlinclark, the rookie phenom who had turned every Fever game into an event, sidelined by a groin injury that refused to heal. Sophiecunningham, their reliable wing scorer, lost to an MCL tear. Sydney Colson's ACL snapped her season in an instant. Chloe Bibby's knee wouldn't cooperate. Ari McDonald fractured her foot. One after another, the bodies fell, and suddenly the Fever's depth chart looked like a skeleton crew. Most franchises would have folded under that kind of weight. Analysts wrote them off immediately: too many gaps, too many losses, not enough star power to carry the load. The whispers grew louder. Without Clark, what's left? Every headline framed Indiana as an afterthought, a cautionary tale of bad luck and fragile momentum. Fans felt it too, their playoff hopes slipping away in real time. What was supposed to be the year Indiana turned the corner seemed destined to become another footnote in the league's cycle of rebuilds. But there's a funny thing about collapse. It can either crush a group or strip it down to what actually matters. And that's what started to happen inside Indiana's locker room. With every name crossed off the rotation, the excuses thinned out too. There was no hiding behind what could have been. No waiting for a savior in street clothes. The players who remained had to decide: either sulk their way through the calendar or double down on fight. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. It came with small choices. One more box out, one more close out, one more possession played like it was the last. The Fever stopped looking at who wasn't available and started leaning into whoever was. The roster shrank, but the roles expanded. Bench players took center stage. Journeymen became nightly contributors. Suddenly, Indiana wasn't just surviving, they were recalibrating. Still, even resilience needs direction. Without a clear leader, that kind of grit can scatter. And as the Fever tried to steady themselves, one player in particular began to shift the narrative, not just filling space, but rewriting what was possible when the face of the franchise is stuck on the bench. And that player was Kelsey Mitchell. When the lights dimmed on Caitlinclark's season, most people assumed Indiana's spark would vanish with her. But instead, the spotlight swung towards someone who had quietly been carrying this franchise for years: Kelsey Mitchell. Mitchell didn't just step up, she exploded. Night after night, she became the Fever's heartbeat, pouring in points when defenses knew exactly where the ball was going and still couldn't stop it. Double teams? She split them. Full court pressure? She dribbled through it like traffic cones. Every scouting report screamed her name, yet she carved out buckets with the kind of confidence that forces opponents to rethink their entire game plan. The numbers alone tell the story. She averaged more than 20 a night, breaking Tamika Catching's single-season scoring marks and cementing herself as the most productive scorer in franchise history. Think about that, surpassing a Hall of Famer while carrying a depleted roster on her back. And she wasn't just scoring in garbage time. Mitchell was hitting daggers, momentum killers, and the kind of late clock jumpers that remind everyone why she's a problem in this league. What made it even more impressive was the weight she carried beyond the points. Mitchell wasn't just asked to score, she was asked to handle the ball, set the pace, and be the anchor of an offense built on shifting lineups and constant improvisation. Most players would break under that load. She seemed to thrive on it, like every added responsibility sharpened her edge, and the energy wasn't lost on her teammates. When Mitchell caught fire, the entire Fever bench lit up. You could feel the belief ripple through the team. If she was still swinging, then the fight wasn't over. But even the most relentless scorer can't hold the foundation alone. Every great run needs stability, someone who keeps the floor from caving in when the pressure mounts. And for Indiana, that role fell on their young cornerstone in the paint, Aliyahboston. Every great team needs a steady hand. And for Indiana, that presence came in the form of Aliyahboston. While Kelsey Mitchell lit up the scoreboard, Boston made sure the ground beneath the Fever never cracked. She wasn't just putting up respectable numbers, She was redefining what reliability looked like in a season built on chaos. Night after night, Boston delivered. 15 points, 8 or 9 rebounds, and a defensive footprint that stretched across the entire paint. She set a new franchise record for single-season rebounds, and it wasn't just volume, it was timing. Her board stopped opponent runs, ignited fast breaks, and stole back possessions that Indiana had no business keeping. Every time the game started to wobble, Boston planted her feet and turned it steady again. Her value wasn't just in stats, it was in presence. Bigger forwards leaned on her, and she didn't budge. Guards tried to sneak through gaps, and she shut the door. Opponents learned quickly. If you wanted anything easy in the lane, you weren't getting it on Boston's watch. Even when the Fever rotated lineups like a deck of cards, she remained the constant, the anchor that made sure Indiana's identity didn't dissolve. And then there was her voice. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, but one her teammates leaned into when moments got tense. She embodied the kind of resilience you can't draw on a whiteboard, grit, patience, and the willingness to do the heavy lifting, possession after possession. That's why Boston became more than just a young star. She became the blueprint for how the Fever handled adversity. Every rebound was a reminder. No matter how many players fell to injury, no matter how many analysts counted them out, Indiana wasn't collapsing. Not with her in the middle. But as vital as Mitchell's scoring and Boston's steadiness were, there was still the looming question: how does a team with so many scars actually transform frustration into momentum? The answer wasn't found in highlight reels. It was found in a mentality shift that turned pain into purpose. Every team faces adversity, but few get tested the way Indiana did this season. After the injuries stacked up, the Fever didn't just wobble, they flat out stumbled. 4 losses in 5 games, a locker room filled with frustration, fans watching momentum drain away like water through a crack in the floor. The narrative was easy to write. Indiana was finished. The season was broken beyond repair. But here's where the story took a turn. Instead of splintering, the Fever found clarity. Head coach Stephanie White stripped the game down to its bones. Forget the playbook packed with options that no longer fit the roster. She demanded simplicity with precision. 2 paint touches per trip. Move the ball until it found the right hands. Cut hard, no passengers. And on defense, suffocate the first action, punish the second, make opponents hate every trip down the floor. That wasn't just a tactical reset, it was a mental one. Indiana stopped talking about who they didn't have and started leaning into who they did. Bench players weren't just stopgaps, they were contributors. Role players became disruptors. Veterans and hardship signings weren't placeholders, they were fuel. The Fever began to play like a team with nothing left to lose, which paradoxically made them more dangerous than ever. The results spoke louder than any pep talk. They stopped hanging their heads after mistakes. They fought through missed calls, bad whistles, and double-digit deficits without folding. Instead of waiting for someone else to save them, they trusted that the next pass, the next cut, the next possession could flip the game. And soon, those moments stacked. One grind-out win, then another, and another. By the time Indiana looked up, the collapse that could have buried them had become their rallying cry. They weren't just surviving, they were shaping a new identity. One built on resilience, unity, and an edge that comes only when you've already tasted rock bottom. And that new identity would be tested on the biggest stage yet, a matchup with the Minnesotalynx, the league's gold standard, a team Indiana wasn't supposed to handle. But instead of bowing to reputation, the Fever seized the moment. When the Minnesotalynx came to town, it wasn't just another game on the calendar. This was the measuring stick. The Lynx had been the standard all season, disciplined, deep, and dangerous. On paper, they were everything Indiana wasn't supposed to be. For the Fever, still limping through roster chaos, this matchup looked like a reminder of the gap between contenders and survivors. But from the opening tip, Indiana made one thing clear. They weren't interested in moral victories. They were coming for the win. The statement landed fast. A 10-0 run to start the game had the Lynx calling timeout before fans even settled into their seats. Every possession screamed urgency. Kelsey Mitchell sliced through the defense, aliyahboston owned the boards, and role players who'd been written off earlier in the season looked fearless. By halftime, the Fever weren't clinging to momentum, they were dictating it. Minnesota tried to claw back, but the rhythm never came. The Fever's defense pressed every weakness, forcing contested jumpers and sloppy passes. The Lynx finished just 2 for 20 from beyond the arc, each miss fueling the sense that this wasn't their night. Indiana, on the other hand, shot like a team convinced the hoop was twice as wide. By the break, the cushion was double digits, and the Fever never let it slip. What made the performance even more striking was who delivered the punches. Odyssey Sims, a hardship signing most thought wouldn't last, came off the bench for 15 points that swung energy every time it lagged. Aerial Powers buried back-to-back threes in the second half that killed Minnesota's last gasp. Natasha Howard played like a glue piece, defending everywhere and scoring when possessions seemed doomed. This wasn't just a star duo carrying the load. It was a roster stitched together by necessity, playing like they belonged in the spotlight. For the first time in nearly a decade, Indiana crossed the threshold of a winning season, 24 victories, 20 losses, and did it against the league's best. 9 years of false starts washed away in 40 minutes of proof that the Fever were back on the map. But while the team performance was historic, the night's most unforgettable moment didn't come from the box score. It came when one player, carrying the memory of an earlier humiliation, flipped the script in real time. The play that sent fans into a frenzy, lit up social media, and stamped this game into franchise lore belonged to Lexiehull. Every game has a heartbeat, and on this night, it pulsed through Lexiehull. For weeks, Indiana fans had been waiting for her moment, a chance to flip the script on the elbow that left her bloodied and penalized in their last clash with Minnesota. Nobody knew exactly how it would happen, or if it would happen at all. But when the ball found her at the top of the key, matched one-on-one with Kayla McBride, fate delivered the setup. One dribble left, a hesitation. McBride lunged, and just like that, the balance disappeared. Her legs tangled, her body pitched forward, and the crowd erupted. McBride had been dropped. Cameras froze on the moment, fans leapt from their seats, and within minutes the clip was flooding social media feeds. Indiana fans called it karma. Neutral fans laughed at the irony. For Hull, it was just basketball, but for everyone watching, it was justice. What made it so powerful wasn't just the crossover itself, but the context wrapped around it. Weeks earlier, she had been the victim, hit whistled, and left to swallow the insult of a technical that never should have been hers. Now, in the rematch, she wasn't the one bleeding on the floor. She was the one putting her rival on it metaphorically, flipping humiliation into highlight. The arc was too perfect to ignore. Teammates erupted from the bench, pointing, shouting, waving towels like they knew they were watching a moment that would stick. Fans leaned forward, phones in the air, already imagining the replay they'd send to friends. And the symbolism was impossible to miss. Hull wasn't just answering for herself. She was answering for the Fever, a team written off and underestimated all year, a team told it wasn't tough enough to hang with the league's elite. But here's the part that made her performance truly unforgettable. She didn't stop at the highlight. Hull played relentless defense the entire night, smothering Minnesota's backcourt, contesting every shot, turning simple sets into ugly possessions. Stat sheets might not capture deflections and hustle plays, but the energy shift was obvious. She gave Indiana exactly what they needed: toughness at the wing, confidence in the clutch, and a reminder that the Fever's identity runs deeper than any one superstar. That crossover became the viral headline, but the story was bigger. It was Hull's transformation from role player to tone setter, from overlooked to undeniable. She wasn't just getting revenge, she was setting the standard. And that's why her moment resonated so strongly. It wasn't about embarrassing McBride. It was about embodying the fight that defined Indiana's entire season. The Fever weren't just clawing through adversity, they were turning it into fuel. And Hull's redemption was the snapshot of that resilience. But as sweet as redemption tastes, it carried an even greater weight, the symbol of a cultural reset nearly a decade in the making. What Lexie Hull did to Kayla McBride wasn't just a viral clip, it was the perfect metaphor for the Indiana Fever's entire season. A team bloodied, underestimated, and dismissed suddenly flipped the script. Just like Hull turned humiliation into redemption, Indiana turned injury after injury into a rallying cry that no one could ignore. For 9 long years, the Fever lived in the wilderness. Losing seasons piled up, rebuilds stalled, coaches and lineups cycled through without ever snapping the culture back into place. But now, with 24 wins and their first winning record since 2015, the tide finally feels like it's shifting. This wasn't a miracle run or a lucky stretch. It was the product of grit, players refusing to fold, coaches demanding discipline, and fans sticking around long enough to see the storm break. Even Caitlinclark, sidelined in street clothes, played a role in that transformation. Cameras caught her waving arms on the sideline like an assistant coach, barking coverages, signaling timeouts, and laughing with refs in between possessions. She may not have been on the floor, but her presence still pulsed through the team. And when you combine her future with the foundation already built, the Fever don't look like a one-year story. They look like the beginning of something bigger. The beauty of this season is how perfectly Hull's story mirrors the team's. Written off, bruised, hit with calls that made no sense, yet somehow rising anyway, stronger for every obstacle. The crossover that dropped McBride wasn't just sweet revenge, it was the exclamation point on a season that proved Indiana's toughness is no longer up for debate. And now, as the playoffs loom, the question isn't whether the Fever belong. They've already answered that. The question is how far this mentality can take them and what happens when their brightest star finally returns to a team that's rediscovered its fight. Because if this is what Indiana looks like battered and bruised, imagine them at full strength. The Indiana Fever's season could have ended a dozen different times. Every injury, every losing streak, every bad whistle looked like the crack that might finally break them. But instead of splintering, they forged something stronger. Kelsey Mitchell's scoring firepower, aliyahboston's anchor in the paint, Stephanie White's blueprint of grit, and finally, Lexie Hull's redemption moment, all of it came together to create the first real glimpse of who the Fever are becoming. That crossover against Kayla McBride wasn't just a highlight. It was a statement. It told the league that Indiana isn't waiting for pity, headlines, or excuses. They're carving out their own story, one built on toughness, defiance, and the refusal to quit no matter how heavy the odds get. And now, with their first winning record in nearly a decade, the Fever aren't sneaking into the playoffs. They're walking in with momentum, confidence, and a culture reset that fans have been begging for since 2015. Add Caitlinclark's eventual return to this mix, and suddenly the future in Indianapolis doesn't look fragile anymore, it looks dangerous. But that's just my take. What about you? Was Hull's crossover the single most satisfying moment of the Fever's season, or just one piece of a bigger puzzle? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, I want to hear them. And if you've been riding with Indiana through every twist of this season, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Because if this is what the Fever look like beaten down, imagine what they'll do when they're fully loaded. Click the video on your screen right now, and I'll see you in the next one.